In 1969, when Linda Dranoff entered Osgoode Hall Law School, she was one of the few women in a male-dominated field. Over her nearly 40-year career, that changed dramatically, with women like her playing critical roles in changing the profession and the law. Her book, Fairly Equal: Lawyering the Feminist Revolution, offers a front row seat to that shifting world, and it brings Linda Dranoff to our studio tonight. Hi.
Good to see you.
You're like a superhero to me. I mean, you're like a superhero to all of Canada. You're like Wonder Woman.
Well, no swords and no guns.
No, and
very peaceful methodology.
Exactly. So you grew up in the 1950s.
Yes.
What was it like to grow up as a young woman in the 1950s in Toronto?
Well, there was the expectation always that your role in life was as a member of the family. You're you're going to be a wife, and if you weren't a wife by the time you were 21, there was something seriously wrong with you. And men really did control the culture. They controlled reproduction. They controlled property. There was no provision for support, for example. I mean, a good husband was always a good thing to find because they didn't necessarily have to rely on laws that favored them. But for those that did, it was very difficult for women who didn't choose wisely, which many women unfortunately didn't. But the 50s was just a time when girls were not, and we were girls, were not expected to do anything much but the very important role of raising a family, getting married, raising a family, in that order.
And you called it the Mrs. degree?
The MRS degree.
Yeah.
When we went to university, those few of us who had the opportunity and the interest, because there were 5% of people went to university when I entered, and of those there were very few women with possibilities. So there was no expectations really that a woman would have career goals, would earn a better living than her husband, which many did eventually, you know. It was a very different, very drawn-back era. Even contraception and abortion were criminal offenses. In other words, a woman was a reproducer, and the laws prevented her from obstructing that process.
At home, though, for your family,
yeah.
You say that you had the greatest example because the relationship between your mother and your father was very equal.
Yes.
And in fact, your mom was an entrepreneur in the 1950s.
Yes, I was so lucky because my parents had a loving relationship, and I didn't know that. I mean, I knew that the world was like this. Despite whatever my parents said in the home, I expected if I didn't get married by the time I was 21, you know, I had lost my place in society. And not that they said it, but there's influences outside as well. But my father was a very modern thinker. My mother, when they got married, earned more than he did because she was a super duper typist in an era where they didn't have, keyboards.
Yeah.
It wasn't keyboards. It was clunking old Underwoods and Remingtons. And she typed over 100 words a minute, and she hired herself out for piecework rather than on a salary. And so she was very entrepreneurial for a time. So I did have good examples. I didn't have them lecturing to me, but I saw.
You saw what,
Yeah.
And you write that your ideas about fairness was fueled by your parents' strong sense of right and wrong. In what ways?
Well, they were people who just had a sense of, for example, after the war, the Second World War, there were many Canadian Japanese people interned in internment camps because they were considered, because they were Japanese Canadians, that they had some linkage to Japan that was involved in a war in which Canada was on the opposite side. So they were interned. Or they couldn't find places to live. It was sort of, during the war they were interned, and then afterwards they had trouble finding places to live. Well, my parents rented a couple of rooms to a lovely Japanese couple. And no, they didn't have, as I say, no lectures. It just happened.
By example.
It just happened by example.
And one of my favorite stories in the book, lots of great stories, but one of my favorite stories is the story about Hart House at the University of Toronto. And it's a protest you led when President John F. Kennedy, then a young senator, was in town to debate Stephen Lewis.
Right.
What happened?
Well, it was my first year of university, and they had Hart House debates all the time. But Hart House, because of the rules set down when Hart House was built, was closed to women, except, you know, the odd time they'd let us come in after 3 o'clock in the afternoon for a cup of coffee if a male took us in.
How generous.
That sort of thing. But they did have debates, and they did allow women once a year. But they did not. We wanted to be allowed in to hear John F. Kennedy because we heard he was, you know, he was running for the next president. He was a handsome guy, and he was an interesting man, and we wanted to go in for that debate. Well, a group of us went to talk to the executive director of Hart House, then called the warden, and asked, could we please have access to this one debate rather than any of the others? Oh, no, he said. What are you fussing over? You know, he was sort of, there, girls. So we left and we picketed. I wrote a letter to the editor of the Varsity. It's reproduced in my book, in fact. And women of the world unite. You know, and there was no feminist movement at that time. There was just a group of women who thought, this just isn't fair. Why should we be excluded?
And do you think that that event planted the seed of the work that you were to do?
I think it did, even if I didn't necessarily understand it at the time. It's sort of my earliest memory of activist work for women and against unfairness.
When did you first entertain the idea of becoming a lawyer?
Well, I think I actually secretly entertained it when I was in university for my undergraduate program, but I didn't see any women lawyers around me. Women weren't expected to go into law. It was just one of those things that sort of wasn't on the list of expectations. So I put it in the back of my mind. And after that, I got married. I was still 21. I fulfilled the expectations of the era. When the marriage did not work out, unfortunately, I then decided, well, I have another chance. With this second chance, I'm supposed to do what I really want to do. So I decided I would go to law school.
You go to law school, you're a mature student, you're a single parent, and you have a young child.
She was 1.5 years at the time.
What was that first year like?
Well, first of all, it was thrilling. I kept sort of pinching myself and looking around. Did I really manage to accomplish this?
And I forgot you were a woman too. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And most of the students didn't know I had a child. I had organized things so that I had care for her during the day, and then I would come home in the evening and do studies in the evening. But you know, it was one of those times where you say, why not?
But even after you finish law school, an important component of, before you become a lawyer, you have to article. And what happened when you tried to get an articling position?
Well, in the first instance, some of my professors recommended me to some of the top firms, you know, the buddies who call the buddies and say, who are the up-and-coming people who will be good lawyers? So some of the profs recommended me, but I found that these big law firms at the time didn't want women. It was very clear that whoever may have interviewed me, the senior lawyers did not want to hire women at that time. And this was 1972 when I graduated law school and when I was looking for an articling position. I did eventually find one which had problems of its own, as I lay out in the book.
And then you end up opening your own firm.
I did.
And in the book, you write about the importance of being self-employed and how that helped your career. If you hadn't been self-employed, do you think you would have had the career that you had?
No. No. I don't think so, because I always say I had the best boss in the world. I think that I had a goal to make a living as a lawyer, yes, and to do the very best I could for my clients, but also to try and achieve fairness in those places where the knowledge of law would give me that opportunity to achieve fairness. So many firms at that time were, their goals were profit. They weren't looking for justice as much as they were looking to, carry out the profession and be in business. Mm-hmm. So I had different goals. I was more willing to take a client within a cause, but I always made a living anyway. I just balanced things around.
And you did lots of law, but you
Yes.
said that the only law that you wouldn't do was criminal law.
Yes.
Why was that?
Well, I guess I felt that in the most serious case, there would be a certain amount of sexual assault cases, what they called rape cases in those days. And I just didn't feel, I felt that any guy who wanted to hire me to represent him, to defend him in a rape charge, would be looking at least partly for the fact that I was a woman, and I didn't want my womanhood to be used in that way.
Because being a woman had been used against you before.
I guess so.
Yeah. Mm. When did you decide to focus on family law? Why did you want to focus on family law?
Well, actually, it was the timing that family law, just around the time when I was setting up my office, it was the Murdoch case. Pardon me. The Murdoch case became a matter of a cause célèbre, where a farm wife was not able to achieve her fair share of what she'd helped work for. Mm-hmm. And so governments, women, fair-minded people started looking for how should we change family laws. So I sort of entered my practice of law at the time that family laws were starting to change. When I actually opened my office, the divorce was very difficult to get. In the first instance, it had just become legal 6 or 8 years previously, and there was no right to share property, and support was minimal. So if I'd been left with the laws in existence when I first came in, I wouldn't have been able to be of much assistance to people.
But I think it's so interesting that you took that on, and I don't want to skip ahead the book, but towards the end of the book, you said that all of us can affect change. And
Yes.
we were talking about it before we started taping. How can one person make a difference?
One person can make a difference by standing up for what's right, for making a contribution in wherever they find themselves. There's all kinds of things in the world that need to be paid attention to. And everybody has different skills, different interests, but there are times when you're just supposed to stand up and be counted. And if everybody did that, there'd be a lot of excellent change made in the world. And I guess I represent that idea in a way.
And you fought for so many people, but you write that during your career, 2 of your clients ended up taking their own lives after their marriages fell apart. What kind of impact did that have on you?
Well, first of all, I knew that I had done everything possible that I could for these women. It was more, once they were divorced, they had reasonable settlements, the marriage was over. These were women who were so deeply tied to their husbands for their own feelings of self-worth that they couldn't go on living without that. To me, it was just a very sad way in which women are sometimes acculturated, that we think that we ourselves are not worthy as individuals unless we are attached to a worthy partner. And I think these women saw things the wrong way, and there was no way to be that they could be persuaded otherwise.
You've even taken some cases to the Supreme Court of Canada. Tell us about that experience.
Well, the experience at the Supreme Court of Canada was terrific. That was when I was the first family law reform that was brought in. As I said, as I started my practice, they were looking to family law reform. There was a Reform Act brought in Ontario in 1978. And I thought, oh, well, if it's interpreted properly, this can achieve equality and fairness for women. And I was shocked that while the trial judge in the particular case, the Leatherdale case that I took—
Barbara Leatherdale? Yeah.
Yes. Gave her 50-50. She'd worked for part of the marriage, she'd had a child, she'd taken care of the home, and the Court of Appeal turned that aside, and so therefore I was in a position where I had to decide where do we go from here? Because of that Court of Appeal decision held, that was in 1980. I was only out 6 years at that point, practicing law for 6 years. I felt it would be a disservice to all women in Ontario. So I decided that what we had to do was see the case through the whole legal route. In other words, not stop at the Court of Appeal, but go to the Supreme Court of Canada and see what they did. Maybe they would achieve equality, allow for the wife to have half of the family the assets accumulated during the marriage. That was the principal issue. And the husband had pension, business assets, that sort of thing. Well, so I took it to the Supreme Court of Canada, which was, thrilling. I mean, they don't teach you in law school how to go to the Supreme Court of Canada. So I still remember that and the back and forth with the judges, the extremely intelligent people with their points of view. And it was an excellent experience. However, in the end, those judges, all men, by the way, decided that Barbara Leatherdale should achieve only the share of the property that could be attributed to her working outside the home for half the marriage, not to her child raising and rearing role in the home at all. So she got a quarter of the assets as a result of that. So from there, I decided that I would organize a lobby to lobby the government to change the law to make it crystal clear that men and women were supposed to share equally what they accumulated together during the marriage, and that a woman's childbearing and rearing role would be considered a contribution to the relationship and to the financial result of the marriage.
What was that experience like?
Well, the lobbying experience was interesting. It was fun. I wasn't educated for it, but you go one step at a time and you do what you can. As I say, each person finds himself in a place. I found myself in a place where I thought the Supreme Court of Canada result was wrong, inadequate. It was right as far as it went, but it was inadequate. And then it was important to take it to the next step. So, I organized a lot. We press releases, petitions, letters to the Attorney General, meetings with the Attorney General, and so forth, until we achieved at that time, it was Roy McMurtry who was Attorney General under the Progressive Conservative government of Ontario, the Bill Davis government. He was still in office then. And he had brought in the 1978 Act, and this was 1982. And notwithstanding that, by 1984, I had persuaded him that he had to improve it. He had to improve the situation, that the judges were not applying the law as he may have intended. I mean, that's how I felt it was anyway.
Well, you write that almost everything you worked for was in the Family Law Act of 1986.
Yes.
What did it feel like to have been part of that kind of positive change for women and families?
It was exhilarating. It was deeply satisfying because, after all, I was then in a position as a family law lawyer to see it in action. And I would be able to tell clients who consulted me, you're going to get half of everything, right? On the other hand, it wasn't all roses and, whatever the expression is. I mean, there was resistance by husbands. There was resistance by lawyers who they retained. There was still resistance by some judges. And I was quite surprised. It's one thing to say the law is in place, and then the next thing is to say that it will be interpreted the way you felt the law was intended to be interpreted. So there were cases that tried to cut away some of the advances of that law, and I do describe some of those cases in great depth in the book, because I think it's instructive to people, especially younger people now entering law or trying to make change in any way, to understand that you not only have to find a way to persuade decision makers to make change, you have to find a way to persuade the people who implement the change to do it fairly.
And sitting here today talking to you, how aware, do you think that young women today are aware of all the things that you and your peers have accomplished for women's rights?
Actually, I don't, and that's the interesting part. I think they take it a lot for granted. I spoke at an event recently where a young woman lawyer stood up after I talked about some of the things that are in my book, and she said, "How come we weren't taught any of this?" And number of young people in the audience said the same thing. And I think that's it's a tragedy in a way, because if you don't understand what went before, you don't, first of all, appreciate what you have. You don't understand that it can be taken away. And another very strong focus of my book is the need to maintain vigilance and to work to maintain the advances. I mean, there have been times when some of the advances made were then, for instance, there was an Employment Equity Act in the early 90s, and then the government that came in afterwards decided that that Employment Equity Act must have been a quota system, right? To give jobs to women on a quota basis. It never said that. But that succeeding government, the Mike Harris government, by the way, simply repealed the law and then ordered all the information that had been accumulated because of that law to be shredded. Okay? So that shows you, here's this excellent law in place. The succeeding government got rid of it. So what I'm saying to you is, it shows that we have to maintain vigilance in order to keep the advances that we've made and to keep struggling for further advances. I mean, we're not done. This is a history of the feminist revolution and my own personal history. And we're not done. I mean, we've been promised really good childcare places for many, many years. And there's recent rumblings about something happening. I don't know whether that even meets the promises that were made 20 years ago. But pay equity, the pay equity law was passed in 1986. And at that time, women were earning roughly 63 cents for every dollar a man's earned. And it's 70 cents today.
7 cents more.
You can take away all the excuses people give, but there is a significant part of that that's attributable to discrimination.
And because if you're a person of color or ability class, you also get paid less and get treated differently.
That's right. All these things, the Employment Equity Act, the Pay Equity Act, just as two examples, they were not just to benefit women as compared to men. They were to make circumstances fair and equal for everyone. That means people with other differences that might be treated differently, as you say.
Women now often make up at least half of law school graduating classes. Does this surprise you?
Well, not really. I mean, I think it's terrific. The trend started after I got there.
Would you want it to be more, though?
More than 50%, more than 55%. You know what? Whoever wants to and has the ability should have the opportunity to do it. But at the same time, many of these young women are leaving the firms that cannot accommodate their need for a balanced life. A woman should not have to choose between having children and having a career. I mean, that's from the 50s. And if a woman lawyer works for certain firms, they are expected to work so many hours that it's very difficult to have a family life as well. And that's the kind of thing that even with more than 50% of the graduating classes being women, they still haven't managed to, in the workforce, make things fair for themselves in every respect. There are some. I mean, I chose to go into practice for myself. I still recommend it. When I have chances to talk to young women, I still recommend it to them. I say, get your experience, go to one of the firms that'll give you the experience in the area that you want to specialize in. Then get a couple of women together and set up your own firm, and then you can organize your own life.
We hear a lot about imposter syndrome. You were talking about being at the Supreme Court. Was there any time in your career that you felt intimidated by something or someone in your professional career?
Intimidated. Well, I suppose in my heart of hearts I might have been, yes, but I never let myself act on it. In other words, these feelings come out from a certain place and a distance in society, but there's no reason to be intimidated. I found later, in fact, sometimes they would tell me that I intimidated them, and I'd say, I don't intend to. Yeah.
And what advice would you have for women who want to become lawyers?
I'd say do it. Do it, absolutely. And as I say, my preference was to be on your own, but if you can find a place in a firm that allows you to live your life fully, as I say, nobody should have such a life that you're only working many hours a day.
What is your hope for this book?
My hope for this book is that young people will read it and they will learn that they can make a contribution in whatever way they find themselves, in whatever career they happen to be in. There are all kinds of ways. Everybody can do something to make this world a better place. And I think it's incumbent upon everyone to try. But as I say, I'm not making the goals so huge that they will feel they can't possibly achieve it. I'm saying pick a small goal. If everyone has even a small goal and a small way in which they can contribute to their society, it will help everyone.
Just do something.
Do something.
Thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you.
Tripping me out that I'm sitting here in part because of all the work that you've done. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.